Liturgy of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, for the Southern Jurisdiction of the United States. Part 2. 4th to 14th. In the Supreme Council for the Southern Jurisdiction of the United States, 8th day, A.M. 5626. Resolved, that the Sovereign Grand Commander be requested to prepare a manual for the various degrees in the Ancient and Accepted Rite, and that the same, together with a work already prepared by him on the morals and dogma of the Rite, be published under his direction, at the expense of and under the sanction of this Supreme Council. Preface. The Liturgy, Monitor or Manual, of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, as that rite is practiced in the Southern Jurisdiction of the United States, of which liturgy the pages that follow constitute the second part, has been prepared by the Sovereign Grand Commander in pursuance of the resolution on a preceding page, and accords with the ritual of the rite approved by the Supreme Council. It is hoped that it may not prove entirely unworthy of the acceptance and consideration of the craft, and that it may prove useful to the initiated. Nothing whatever, which it contains, has been copied from any other monitor, manual or book of the Rite, and whatever is the same in it and any other manual, has been borrowed from it or from the rituals of the Southern Jurisdiction, by the consent of the Sovereign Grand Commander. The part now published will be speedily followed by the others, containing the first, second and third degrees, according to the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite, and those from the 15th to the 32nd inclusive. It only remains to add that the author has no pecuniary interest in the work, it being published for the benefit of the Supreme Council. In this, as in all else that concerns the Rite, the labor of the Sovereign Grand Commander is its own sufficient reward. The ineffable degrees. 4th degree. Secret Master. The Lodge, its furniture, decorations, etc. The hangings are black, strewed with silver tears. The lodge represents the most holy place, or cubical sanctuary of the temple. The orient is separated from the main body of the room by railing or balustrade, running from one side of the room to the other, with a gate in the middle. Over the master's seat hangs a gilded circle, within which is an equilateral triangle, and in the center of that a five-pointed blazing star, in the center of which is the Old Hebrew and Samaritan letter Yud. The lodge is lighted by 8 large lights, by 2s, in the north, south, east and west. Besides the principal lights, there may be as many others as may be desired. The altar, in the center of the lodge, is covered with a black cloth, strewed with tiers of silver. On it are a roll of parchment or the Hebrew Pentateuch, and the Book of Constitutions, closed. And on that lies a key of ivory. No working tools are used in this lodge, for the reason that the labors on the temple were suspended after the death of the Master Curran. The vacant chair in the west is draped with black, strewed with tiers of silver. In the orient are the Ark of the Covenant, the candelabrum with 7 lights, the altar of incense, and the table of the bread of the presence. Officers, titles, decorations, etc. The Master represents King Solomon, and is styled Puissant Master, or Puissant King Solomon. He wears a robe of black silk or velvet, lined with ermine, and a crown, and holds a scepter in his hand. In front of him is a triangular altar, covered with a black cloth, strewed with tiers of silver. On it is a wreath of olive and laurel leaves. Only the senior warden sits in the west. He represents Adoniram ben Abada, who was set by King Solomon over the tribute. He is styled Venerable Inspector. The junior warden sits in the south, with the orator. The Master wears a broad blue watered ribbon, from the right shoulder to the left hip, at the end of which hangs, as a jewel, an equilateral delta of gold, with the letters I, A upon it, on one side, and, on the other. The wardens and all the other brethren wear a broad white watered ribbon, edged with black, at the end of which hangs the jewel of the degree. The jewel is an ivory key, on the wards of which, in black, is the letter Z. The apron is white, edged with black. The gloves are white, turned over with black at the wrists. The flap of the apron is blue, with an open eye embroidered on it in gold. The strings are of black ribbon. 2 branches, one of laurel and the other of olive, cross each other in the middle of the apron, and at their crossing is the letter Z, embroidered in gold. The age of a secret master is the cube of 2 years. The hours of labor are from dawn till the close of day. To open. The senior warden. I have passed from the square to the compass. I have seen the tomb of our Master Curran, and with my brethren have shed tears thereon. The Senior Warden. Under the laurel and olive trees. The Senior Warden. Secrecy, obedience and fidelity. The Junior Deacon. To keep inviolably the secrets entrusted to me. The Senior Deacon. To obey the laws of God and the order, and the will of the puissant Master. The Senior Warden. To be faithful unto death. The Senior Warden. To provide for the welfare of the order, and to teach the craftsmen their duties, remembering that, though he their master, they are still his equals in the eye of God and Masonry. The Senior Warden. Darkness has fled before the dawn, and the great light is about to shine in our lodge. Reception. The aspirant, desiring to be admitted to the degree of Secret Master, is carefully examined in the work of the 3 first degrees. He must be duly and truly prepared to receive the degree he seeks, must have made suitable proficiency in the first 3 degrees, and his zeal, candor and constancy must be vouched for, and that he will be silent, obedient and faithful. The Venerable Master. I, the Lord thy God, did bring thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt worship no other gods, nor make any graven image, nor any likeness of anything in heaven or on earth, in the sea, or under the earth, to bow down and serve it. The Senior Warden. Turn ye not unto idols, nor make to yourselves molten gods, nor profane the great name of your God, nor swear by his name falsely. The Venerable Master. When thou liftest up thine eyes unto heaven, and seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the armies of heaven, do not thou worship them, nor adore them, like the ancient nations. The Venerable Master. What does the Lord thy God require of thee but to revere him, to walk in his ways, to love him, and to serve him with all thy heart and with all thy soul? East. Woe unto those who aspire to that for which they are unfitted. North. Woe unto those who take up a burden which they cannot bear. South. Woe unto those who assume duties lightly, and afterward neglect them. The Senior Warden. Masonry is duty, and its honor is the reward of work, which is the performance of duty. East. Duty is with us always, inflexible as fate. North. In health or sickness, in prosperity or in adversity, duty is with us always, exacting as necessity. South. It rises with us in the morning, and watches by our pillow at night. In the roar of the city, and in the loneliness of the desert, duty is with you as always, imperative as destiny. The Senior Warden. Like the light you bear, which yet you cannot see, truth and the lost word, which are light, are within the reach of every man that lives, would he but open his eyes and see. The broad highway of duty, straight as narrow, leads directly to them. But men seek shorter routes by bypaths, and lose themselves in the labyrinths of error. Secrecy. Allegiance and obedience. Faithful unto death. The Venerable Master. Let this square ever remind you to walk uprightly, and turn not aside into the inviting paths of error. Let it also remind you that you have now passed from the square to the compasses, as the geometrician passes from the straight lines and angles by which he measures the surface of the earth, to the great curves and circles by which he calculates the movements of the stars. Begin now to rise above the earth, and climb the skies of spiritual knowledge, for there, and not upon the earth, are truth and the lost word to be found. You see our lodge clad in mourning, my brother, and the brethren wearing the emblems of grief, for the death of the Master Curran, and for the eclipse of light and truth by the dark, frowning and baleful clouds of darkness and error. Grief for the loss of those we love is natural and proper. But we lament not only the death of a friend and benefactor, but also the loss of the true word, of which we are deprived by his death, and which we have henceforth to seek for until it is recovered. This lodge represents that of the Sirim or princes of Israel, held immediately after the death of Curran, and before his murderers were discovered. When Adoniram, who had been over the levy and tribute, was made warden and chief of the work in his place, for the time, and Azari ben Nathan was set over the tribute in the stead of Adoniram. And in his place Jehoshaphat was set over the 7 princes, and Jeroboam was made a prince and master to fill the vacancy so created. And as Jeroboam was then made a prince in Israel, and a superintendent of the labors on the temple, So do I now receive and accept you, my brother, as one of the 7 secret masters of this lodge, that you may at once engage in the performance of the more exalted duties which your higher rank imposes on you. Remember that the princes of Masonry are those who best work and best agree. That no valuable result is to be attained in this world without exertion, and that you have yet many steps to ascend before you can reach the heights on which truth sits enthroned, and discover the lost word, known to the ancient patriarchs. Remember that, as the 7 princes of Israel were under their chief, so you are subordinate to your chiefs in Masonry, and still more to your country, and most of all and above all, to God. And, therefore, prepare yourself to command, by learning to obey. Remember that life is short, and in it there is much to do, and death approaches, and is nearer and nearer to us at every breath we draw. And, therefore, loiter not by the wayside, but press onward, up the slopes of the mountain, lest death overtake and smite you, before you reach its summit. I crown you with this garland of laurel and olive. Of laurel, emblem of victory and triumph, and sacred to Apollo, god of light. Those who went to consult the Delphic oracle wore garlands of it, as did the Roman priests on festivals. You marched toward an oracle greater than that at Delphi, that of Masonic truth, which gives no equivocal answers, to mislead and deceive. You now commence the upward course that is to fit you to be truth's minister and priest. And I crown you with the laurel and with the olive, emblem of fruition, in hopeful expectation of your ultimate success and victory. The colors of the apron, collar and gloves are emblematical of the grief of the Masons of the Temple on account of the death of the master or director, Quorum, the Phoenician initiate, and the loss of the master's word. They are also symbolical of the contest, in the universe of things, and in the soul of every man that lives, between light and darkness, good and evil, truth and error, a struggle which commenced with time, and is typified in Masonry by the efforts and anxiety of the aspirant to attain the light. The eye on the blue flap of the apron is a symbol of the sun in the sky, eye of the universe, and to the ancients an emblem and image of the deity, the great archetype of light. Light and darkness, said Zoroaster, are the world's eternal ways. An eye was the Egyptian hieroglyphic for the word Iri to perform religious ceremonies, and the second syllable of the name of Osiris, Oshiri, the sun deified, personification of the principle of good. You already know how the name of the master, Quorum, is connected with the same symbol. The east of this lodge represents the Holy of Holies of the First Temple at Jerusalem, and the most secret mysteries of Freemasonry, from which you are now separated by a barrier at present impassable. But you have the key, and someday it will be permitted you to unlock the gate and pass the barrier. Passion, prejudice and error interpose many obstacles between man and the truth. But there are none that energy and perseverance, with honest intentions and pure motives, cannot surmount. The triangle, which is the jewel of the master, as well as that within the circle suspended in the east, represents the grand architect of the universe. The 3 sides of each are wisdom, strength and beauty, or, more properly, wisdom, power and harmony. 3 divine attributes much spoken of by Masons. Wisdom, which conceived. Power, which created. And harmony, which regulates and preserves the universe. That universe is symbolized by us, as it was by the ancient nations, by a circle. The blazing 5-pointed star represents the great central light, which so many nations have worshipped in the sun, its representative. And the letter, surrounded by its splendors, is the Hebrew initial of the name of the great source of light, the true God, whom all Masons revere. Lecture. For the whole lecture, see the Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite. These that follow are but extracts. Masonry is a succession of allegories, the mere vehicles of great lessons in morality and philosophy. You will more fully appreciate its spirit, its object, its purposes, as you advance in the different degrees, which you will find to constitute a great, complete and harmonious system. If you have been disappointed in the first 3 degrees, as you have received them, and if it has seemed to you that the performance has not come up to the promise, that the lessons of morality are not new, and the scientific instruction is but rudimentary, and the symbols are imperfectly explained, remember that the ceremonies and lessons of those degrees have been for ages more and more accommodating themselves, by curtailment and sinking into commonplace, to the often limited memory and capacity of the master and instructor, and to the intellect and needs of the pupil and initiate. That they have come to us from an age when symbols were used, not to reveal, but to conceal, when the commonest learning was confined to a select few, and the simplest principles of morality seemed newly discovered truths, and that these antique and simple degrees now stand like the broken columns of a roofless Druidic temple, in their rude and mutilated greatness. In many parts, also, corrupted by time, and disfigured by modern additions and absurd interpretations. They are but the entrance to the great Masonic temple, the triple columns of the portico. You have now taken the first step over its threshold, the first step toward the inner sanctuary and heart of the temple. You are in the path that leads up the slope of the mountain of truth, and it depends upon your secrecy, obedience and fidelity, whether you will advance or remain stationary. Imagine not that you will become indeed a Mason by learning what is commonly called the work, or even by becoming familiar with our traditions. Masonry has a history, a literature, a philosophy. Its allegories and traditions will teach you much. But much is to be sought elsewhere. The streams of learning that now flow full and broad must be followed to their heads in the springs that well up in the remote past, and you will there find the origin and meaning of Masonry. A few rudimentary lessons in architecture, a few universally admitted maxims of morality, a few unimportant traditions, whose real meaning is unknown or misunderstood, will no longer satisfy the earnest inquirer after Masonic truth. Let whoso is content with these, seek to climb no higher. He who desires to understand the harmonious and beautiful proportions of Freemasonry must read, study, reflect, digest and discriminate. The true Mason is an ardent seeker after knowledge, and he knows that both books and the antique symbols of Masonry are vessels which come down to us full freighted with the intellectual riches of the past, and that in the lading of these argosies is much that sheds light on the history of Masonry, and proves its claim to be acknowledged the benefactor of mankind, born in the very cradle of the race. To learn, to attain knowledge, to become wise, is a necessity for every truly noble soul. To teach, to communicate that knowledge, to share that wisdom with others, and not churlishly to lock up his exchequer, and place a sentinel at the door to drive away the needy, is equally an impulse of a noble nature and the worthiest work of man. To attain the truth, and to serve our fellows, our country and mankind, this is the noblest destiny of man. Hereafter and all your life it is to be your object. If you desire to ascend to that destiny, advance. If you have other and less noble objects, and are contented with the lower flight, halt here. Let others scale the heights, and Masonry fulfill her mission. If you will advance, gird up your loins for the struggle. For the way is long and toilsome. Pleasure, or smiles, will beckon you on the one hand, and indolence will invite you to sleep among the flowers, upon the other. Prepare, by secrecy, obedience and fidelity, to resist the allurements of both. When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it. It is better thou shouldst not vow than that thou shouldst vow and not pay. Be not rash with thy mouth, let not thine heart be hasty to utter anything before God. For God is in heaven and thou art upon earth. Therefore let thy words be few. Weigh well what it is you promise. But once the promise and pledge is given, remember that he who is false to his obligation, will be false to his friend, his family, his country and his God. The word of a Mason, like the word of a knight in the times of chivalry, must be sacred. And the judgment of his brethren, upon him who violates his pledge, should be stem as the judgments of the Roman censors against him who violates his oath. Good faith is revered among Masons as it was among the Romans, who placed its statue in the Capitol, next to that of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. And we, like them, hold that calamity should always be chosen rather than baseness. And with the knights of old, that one should always die rather than be dishonored. A Freemason, therefore, should be a man of honor and of conscience, preferring his duty to everything beside, even to his life, independent in his opinions, and of good morals, submissive to the laws, devoted to humanity, his country, his family, kind and indulgent to his brethren, friend of all virtuous men, and ready to assist his fellows by all means in his power. Thus will you be faithful to yourself, to your fellows and to God, and thus will you do honor to the name and rank of Secret Master, which, like other Masonic honors, degrades, if it is not deserved. To close. He that giveth to the poor, lendeth to the Lord. The Venerable Master. Since nothing remains for us to do, but to practice virtue and avoid vice, Let us remain in silence, that the will of God may be done and accomplished.